Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for Storyteller Spotlight. Go on over to the chat and tell us where you're joining from. And if you have students with you, tell us how many students you have watching with you. We'd love to hear their age levels and what classes you're joining us from. Make sure you chat to everyone. Welcome. If you're just joining us, go over to the chat and tell us who you're watching with, what age students you're watching with, how many students are with you. Tell us where you're watching from. All right, great. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so let's get started. We are so happy that you're here with us today for another version of Storyteller Spotlight, brought to you by Mackin Educational Resources. We're so excited to have Carl Hiaasen with us today to do a read aloud and to answer your questions. Our special thanks to Random House Children's Books for helping us put this together. Just to introduce Carl, he needs no introduction for this group, but Carl Hiaasen was born and raised in Florida, where he still lives today. He works as a journalist and a novelist. He's a graduate of the University of Florida. He began his career as a newspaper reporter, and by the late 1970s had begun writing novels in his spare time, both for adults and for middle grade readers. His books for young readers include the Newbery Honor winner Hoot, as well as Flush, Scat, Chomp, Skink, No Surrender, and Squirm. As we go into the Q&A today, use the Q&A button below to put your questions in. You can put questions in the chat too, but I just can't keep up with the chat as well as the Q&A. So go ahead and use the Q&A. If you go down, it's in the bar, you can see the little button. When you put in a question, if it's coming from a student, tell us the name of the student that asked the question so that can speak directly to the students who are asking us questions. Okay, so I am going to hand it over to Carl to do a read aloud, and then we'll start the Q&A. All right.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to read a little from the book Wrecker, which is my new one. And I haven't read this section aloud ever. So if I stumble or if I sound a little uncertain, it's because I wrote it, been over it so many times, but I've never read it before. So we're going to try. This book takes place in Key West, the island of Key West, which is one of my favorite places. And one of the big attractions of Key West, believe it or not, is the old graveyard. It's a historic old cemetery. And Wrecker, the lead character of the book, spends an odd amount of time in the cemetery for a reason you wouldn't expect. And this is just a little background and how he got this particular job he's got. And then we'll take some questions. The old Key West Cemetery is a weirdly popular tourist attraction. It's only 19 acres, but as many as 100,000 souls are laid to rest there, if you happen to believe in souls. Wrecker's not sure he does. The graveyard was hastily created in 1847 after the city's original cemetery got flooded by a ferocious hurricane, scattering waterlogged coffins all over the island. Solaris Hill, the highest point on the island, was chosen to be the new burial site. Some of the dead are buried underground. Some lie in elevated tombs or family vaults. At night, the cemetery gate is locked. Wrecker leans his bicycle against a tree and walks along Francis Street to the Lavender House. The ladder he always borrows is lying right where he left it. He doesn't know who lives in the house, but the people always go to bed early. Wrecker never sees any lights on. The ladder is necessary to avoid the sharp points on the cemetery's wrought iron fence. Once Wrecker tried to scale it by hand and snagged a belt loop on one of the spear-like shafts, literally yanking off his pants. Fortunately, nobody was around to witness him running in his boxer shorts among the tombstones. Coiled on the back wall of the Lavender House is the garden hose that Wrecker always uses. turns on the water and walks the hose across the street, props the ladder against the fence, climbs up. Balancing on the crossbars, he lifts the ladder to the other side and hops down. The grave of Sarah Chillingwood is only a few steps away. She was born on March 15th, 1949, and died on March 15th, 1978, her 29th birthday. Recker has no idea what happened to her, though who wouldn't be curious? An old British man who lives on Pearl Street pays Recker the ridiculous sum of $50 a week to take care of the young woman's marker. Recker doesn't even know the old man's name. One day he approached Recker in the checkout line at CVS, said he was looking for someone who wasn't afraid of working in a graveyard. First, Recker thought the man was nuts or maybe some kind of predator, until he stopped him again in the parking lot and handed him a map of the cemetery with Sarah's burial site marked with a wiggly X. There were tears in his eyes when he talked about the mess he'd found that morning. The problem is iguanas, which invaded South Florida a long time ago. The gnarly green lizards love to sun themselves on the stone markers in the old cemetery, and they're not bashful about where they poop, which is why Recker requires a hose. Chickens also roam the cemetery and disrespectfully deposit their droppings on the departed. Because the man on Pearl Street visits Sarah Chillingwood's grave almost every morning, Recker comes to do the poop cleaning at night, after the chickens are roosting in the trees and the iguanas have retreated into the crevices beneath the broken grave vaults. So that explains Recker's unusual job. I spent some time in that cemetery doing the research for the book, and saw the iguanas and saw the chickens and saw the crevices and holes underneath the tombstones. It was kind of creepy. If you walk up to an iguana, they just disappear underneath the grave like they were getting swallowed up by the ground. But I saw it with my own eyes and thought it would make for an interesting scene in the novel.
Thank you, Carl. Okay, so let's start with some Q&A. I will ask the questions. I'm going to turn off my camera though, so that you can just see Carl, but you'll hear my voice. So I'll ask the questions, and then keep them coming. So let's start. So we had a great question to kick us off from Caden, who's asking, how long does it take you to write a book?
Well, it depends. The books I write for adults or grown-ups are longer than the books I write for young readers. So that can take, maybe sometimes 2 years between the time I start and when I turn the manuscript into my editor. Usually with a book like Recker, it's anywhere from about 12 to 14 months. Once I actually start writing and rewriting, and once I start putting words down, that's about how long it usually takes.
Another question we had from Colleen, who's a 5th grader, asked, if you could pick one character to be from one of your books, who would you choose?
Each book that I do probably has one character in it that's a little more like me, or let me put it like this, that gets away with stuff that I'd like to be able to get away with. And in this book, I identify with Recker strongly because I was born and raised in South Florida and spent a lot of time in the Keys on the water in little boats on the Keys, which is how he gets around. So I could easily sort of step into his mind and his frame of mind when he goes fishing in the afternoon, stuff like that. But I think it's a hard question to answer because every book is different, and there's always, I think, one character that I don't necessarily empathize with, but who does and says things that I think are pretty cool.
Quinn, who's also a 5th grader, is asking, what inspired you to be an author?
It's real simple. I love to read. When I got into the reading, when I would say I was pretty young. I mean, from a very young age, I liked to read. I would read the newspaper, the sports pages to my dad in the morning, I remember. And I just enjoyed the idea of putting words on paper because I enjoyed reading so much. I enjoyed the idea that something could come out of your imagination, a story. that was so good that people would want to keep turning the pages. You know, whenever I read a good book, I felt like that. And I just thought it would be a cool thing to try to do. And I also fell in love with words, with language, with the, you know, the whole construction of a story, you know, beginning, middle, and end. How do you keep it suspenseful? How do you keep the characters under control? All that fascinated me from when I was very young. I mean, my dad bought me a typewriter when I was 6, which I know sounds a little weird, but I had asked for it. I mean, I got, of course, a basketball and a bicycle. I had other stuff, but that typewriter was something that I just wanted to start practicing on my own, typing up a little story, showing it to my folks or one of my brothers or sisters, you know. So I was lucky. I knew at a fairly young age, you know.
We've got the same question came in from Liam and Jack and Juliana, who all asked, what is the favorite book that you've written, if you have one?
I'd have to say the first book I wrote for young readers, Hoot, is probably my sentimental favorite, because I didn't know if I could write for that group of readers. I'd spent most of my career in the newspaper business writing for grown-ups and writing novels for grown-ups. But I had, at the time I started, a lot of, you know, my nieces and nephews, my stepson at the time, were all about the same age. I want to say around 11, 10 or 11. And the publisher asked me if I wanted to try to write a book for young readers. And I thought, well, it'd be kind of cool to do a book just so that they could read it, you know, for that audience, which I'd never tried before. And so Hoot, I think, which probably, you know, was later made into a movie, and it really caught on. I had no expectation of doing more than that one book for kids. And then I got so many amazing letters. The young readers who write to me are the smartest, coolest, funniest readers I've got. So once the letters started coming in, I thought, this is okay. I'm going to keep doing this. It made me feel so good to know that they were, first of all, they were enjoying the books, but secondly, that they were reading, that they got into reading the way I had done.
We've got some more personal questions, like,
Uh-oh.
do you have any kids? How old are you? And do you have pets?
I am, this is even depressing to say, but I am 70 years old. I have obviously been doing this a long time. I have two boys. One is a student at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana, an engineering student there. And my other one is all grown up, and he's an attorney in Miami. And as for pets right now, here's what we have. We have a 12-year-old yellow Labrador, is the sweetest animal with the simplest brain you can imagine. And we have something called a Bernie Doodle, which is a combination of a Bernese mountain dog and a poodle, but they somehow size it down so it fits in the door. And it's a smart, wonderful dog, but it frankly can be a pain in the butt sometimes. But it's a lot of dog energy in the house. But I've always had pets, dogs, and I used to keep snakes, believe it or not. I had, when I was growing up, you know, I lived near the Everglades, and it wasn't much to do, so we'd catch these snakes. And we had large snake collections, much to our parents' dismay. And I still catch snakes around the house here. I mean, outside here once in a while, harmless ones, obviously. But so I've had all kinds of. I had a pet possum. I raised 2 raccoons. I don't advise that. And I've had every weird thing you can imagine.
B is asking, what is your favorite book you have read? And we had another question specifically in middle school. What was your favorite book?
That's a good question. Boy, in middle school, let me think. I want to say that when I was in middle school, I think, and I'm trying to get the timing right of this, my dad gave me a book called Catch 22 by a writer named Joseph Heller. And it was if you can believe this, a very dark comedy, satire, which is what I like to write and read, about World War II, which was before my time, of course, but my dad had served in the Army, and he read the book. And I mean, to be clear, I probably was a little too young when I read it for some of the language and stuff in the book, but it had an impact on him because it was not just because it was hilariously funny, but it was because it was about the most serious thing you can imagine. In his lifetime was World War II and Pearl Harbor, Germany invading Europe. All of that had affected him, but this was a book that somehow made you laugh on every page. And I remember reading that and thinking, really, that anything was possible. If Joseph Heller could pull that off to make that part of American history funny, which he did because it was satirical, had a sharp edge to it. I thought, well, anything was possible. I might be able to do that, something like that someday. I think that affected me. A book called Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger was also a book I read and said, it just opened some doors to what you could do with words and language, and in that case, point of view of the characters. So those two books stand out, and I'm sure there are others.
We've gotten a lot of questions to the effect of what inspires each one of your new books. How do you get your ideas?
Well, sometimes, especially after I finish a book, I'll go for a few months pulling my hair out thinking, I don't have another idea for a book. But then where I get my ideas from the same place where I got all the ideas from my newspaper columns all those years, and the reporting I did at newspapers, was it really from daily events, the daily headlines, the world we live in, the country we live in, what's going on now. In the case of Wrecker, there are a couple of things in that book that were written in real time that were going on in Key West. One of them, of course, was the COVID pandemic. The other is a huge debate in Key West about these gigantic cruise ships that come in a couple times a day, and they churn up huge amounts of mud in the harbor, which goes onto the reefs and into the seagrass. And most people want those ships to be smaller and in fewer number. And that's a real life thing was going on. It is going on in Key West today. And my idea was to have Wrecker, here's a kid with a little boat who loves to be on the water more than anything else, to have him literally in the middle of that debate, in the middle of that controversy. So I usually go straight to the news or what's actually happening. Another factor I'll tell you in this case, the book Wrecker, which I haven't done in another book, but in researching and going to that cemetery I told you all about, there was a grave in there of a man named Manuel Cabeza. And I'd heard stories about how he had died, but he was actually hanged by the Ku Klux Klan on Christmas Day, 1921 in Key West. Now, I grew up my whole life thinking of Key West as this laid back margarita place, and I'd been there enough that's how I still thought of it. I mean, I knew there were scoundrels and smugglers, and there's always an element of intrigue in Key West, but that's evil. That was pure evil, the KKK. As I researched it, I found out as that terrible organization was sort of gaining ground in the whole country, in Key West, almost everybody in power had joined the Klan in those times, and that was a real thing, which was both horrifying and it was also interesting to me because I didn't know that part of history. It wasn't in any of the history books I had read, but it had actually happened. And there was this fellow's grave, and it was a very sad and tragic story, what happened to him. But I was able to, what I wanted to do was connect what happened in 1921, and this book is set in 2021. So 100 years later, have a generational connection between my true life characters, Wrecker and a friend of his, and what had happened that day in Key West on Christmas Day 100 years ago. Sort of have those events come back or collide, and catch everyone by surprise, because it is a part of history that you just, in my mind, I connected it more with what you'd call the Deep South. where the Klan was especially strong in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. But it was very, very powerful in Florida for a short window of time, a few years. But during that time, it was basically a terrorist group. And so that was another, I don't want to say inspiration, but that was another idea that I wanted to get into the book.
We have a question from Lolly, who's a fourth grader. If you had one tip for a beginning writer, what would it be?
Well, I always tell young writers and aspiring writers, I know it's going to sound corny, but if you don't have a journal, start keeping a journal every day. And I did when I was a kid. And it just, in those days, they called it a diary. You know, it had a lock on it. But it should be something you write in just a little bit every day, whether it's a paragraph, whether it's a page. You do it every single day. You don't have to show it to anybody. It belongs to you, just you. Your thoughts, whatever's going on in your life, whatever something you see or hear, whatever's bothering you, whatever's making you happy. But if you can write a little bit every day and just keep doing that for about a year, and if you go back after a year and look at the very first page you wrote a year earlier, you're going to see a huge difference in your level of skill and how comfortable you are writing between the first thing you wrote and a year later. You'll just by doing it, you're going to get better. And then keep writing it as long as you can, and it'll still get better and better. And again, this is nothing you have to show anybody. When I went off to college, my mom just threw my journal away, of course, along with all my baseball cards. But I think that it was a mom thing back then, that one kid leaves, you clean out the room and give the room to the next kid, you know. But this is something you should keep to yourself, and it really is almost, I don't want to say better than a creative writing class or a good English teacher, but it certainly gives you confidence the more you write, and you get into it. You start looking forward to it at the end of the day. So that would be my advice, is to start keeping a journal if you don't already.
Addie asked, do you have any fears or worries related to writing or publishing a book?
Well, do I have any fears or worries? Well, the one thing, after you do it a number of years, I'll say this, you never take it for granted. It's quite a privilege, and it's a very competitive business. And book publishers are in business to make money. So you're always afraid that the book isn't going to do very well. The book doesn't sell, and then you're not going to get another contract. And then what am I going to do? Mow the lawn, pressure clean the roof? I mean, the only thing I know how to do is write. I'm not really qualified to do anything else. So I think writers in general, and I'm going to say something, and this goes for the very best writers, because I've been lucky to meet and know a lot of really great writers. At some level, you're operating with a certain amount of insecurity, because here you're writing something, it's yours, it's coming out of your imagination, and you're turning it into your editor, and they're making it into a book. And there's this presumption that that you have to have, that it's good enough to share with the rest of the world. At one level, you have to think you're good enough to be able to do this storytelling, and that people want to buy it and want to keep reading it. On the other hand, you just live with this tremendous insecurity that it's going to be a flop, and people aren't going to like it, and then you aren't going to get another contract. You're not going to get to write another book, or whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whatever you write. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's anxiety. Yeah, I think it's okay to be nervous and anxious, because it is a competitive business, and it makes you better. It makes you a better writer.
Jax is wondering, what genre of book is your favorite to read?
I don't have a favorite, Jack. When I'm writing novels, fiction, I almost consciously try to, if I'm reading anything on the side, because I don't want to get distracted, I don't want to get affected by another writer's style, I'll read nonfiction books, true life stories, and because it's different from what I do. And when I do have some downtime, I try to read anything that people sort of recommend to me, other writers, and it's not one particular genre. I'll tell you what I'm not big on, and I don't get mad at me, but I've never been really big on science fiction or fantasy novels because my imagination doesn't work that way. And I've spent my whole grown-up life in the newspaper business, where you're dealing with reality every day. You can't fantasize it. Take a notebook out to a car crash and you write down what happened and you come back and you write a story about it. So that there's no room, that your imagination really doesn't get a workout there. You're just trying to report facts for readers to know what happened. So where my background is not something where I could get into that. Now I have one of my nephews is totally into that kind of, not just sci-fi, but fantasy fiction stuff. And I just never connected with that, but I'll read almost anything else. As long as it's good and someone tells me, hey, this is a great book. And I'm lucky because a lot of times they send me manuscripts in advance of the book being published. They want me to write something nice about it. So sometimes I'll get to see really great books before they're actually out in print. And I can, those, once I start reading, I'll know right away whether it's good or not. You can tell pretty quickly.
We've had some questions about the movie. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what that was like, and specifically, did you meet Jimmy Buffett?
I was actually, Jimmy Buffett and I were very close friends for almost 40 years. And I was friends with him before Hoot came out. And we, went to basketball games to go fishing. We hung out. And he had tried to he wanted his company to make a movie of a book I did many, many years ago that was already taken. It was a book for grownups that had already been optioned in Hollywood. But when Hoot came along, his youngest daughter, Delaney, had read it and told Jimmy this would make a great movie. And Jimmy called me and he said, what do you think about making it into a movie? I said, well, as long as we have some control over it, because, he was a Florida guy. I'm from Florida. Half the time, if you sell a book to Hollywood, California, they want to shoot the whole thing in Hollywood. And California looks nothing like Florida. I've had this happen. So I know, and you start seeing the rough cuts and, there's a mountain. We don't have any mountains in Florida. So Jimmy and I talked about it. He said he would do some music for it. And he wanted to be in it. He wanted to play this character called Mr. Ryan, who was named after my 8th grade history teacher was Mr. Ryan. The guy was terrific, great teacher, and American history. And so I just whimsically in the book, as a sort of a nod to Mr. Ryan, a shout out, I had named the teacher character in the book Mr. Ryan. So Jimmy wanted to be Mr. Ryan. And so he made calls and he put the whole thing together. And he got a director and writer named Will Schreiner, who was a tremendous comedy writer and great guy, but he grew up in Fort Lauderdale like I did. So we had a little mafia of Florida people that tried our best to keep everything under control and authentic and make Florida look good. And it's interesting because the movies are always going to be different from the book. It's very hard to compress a full-length book. A movie script is usually about 90 to 100 pages long. And most books are, 250 to 400, 500 pages. You've got to compress it so much and change so many things. So we had fun and it was the most involved I've ever been with any of the projects. And they'd send me the scripts, they change every day. And I would make margin notes about dialogue I didn't like, something. And they really made an effort to make it as true to the book as they could. And then the ending, of course, they always change the ending a little bit from the novel. And but we had 2 different movie studios we were working with, so we were kind of outnumbered on all that. We fought as best we could, but that's Hollywood. That's what happens. But it was a good experience. The kids that were cast were terrific. Brie Larson was in it, and you can see her in a poster. And now she's won an Academy Award. She's in all these Marvel movies now. And I mean, she was 16 when we shot that movie. So it's kind of nice to see that happen.
Why are your titles usually one word?
That's a good question. When I wrote Hoot, I didn't have a title in my mind. I'd sent some manuscript pages off to my editor, and she gave them to the art department at Random House. And I just hadn't decided on a title yet. And they sent back a mock jacket of Hoot. I wish I had the original. I'd show it to you. No. Well, this is the new one, but the old one, I don't have it sitting here. But anyway, and it was just a jacket. And because there's owls in the book, the owls are sort of the centerpiece of the novel. The artist who did the jacket was doodling around and put the word hoot with an owl. The eyes of the owl would be where the O's would be, just for the purposes of composing the art on the front jacket. And I saw it and I thought, this is very cool. Let's just call it Hoot's perfect for this. I mean, and she really did my job for me. She gave me the title of the book. So that's where they come from. And I wanted to keep all the kids' books for young readers as one word. I liked it because it gave the artist a lot more room to work with elements of the story with their artwork. The longer the title, the bigger the title, the less they can do with the jacket, make the jacket interesting. So that's why the books for young readers are all one word. One of them was called Chomp a few years ago. And people asked me about that book. And I said, well, my granddaughter had come up to me and said, "What, Grandpa, you never write a book called Chomp. Why don't you write Hoot, you write Flush? Why don't you write Chomp?" I didn't have a book in mind, but I thought the least I can do is write a book for my granddaughter. And so that's where that title came from.
Okay, last question comes from Levi and Jordan. What do you like to do for fun?
I do a lot of fishing ever since I was a kid. And as I mentioned, growing up in Florida, I love to go fishing. A lot of times we just get on our bikes and ride until we found some water. But I do a lot of fishing. They fly fishing in particular for saltwater fish down here in Florida, the big tarpon and bonefish and game fish. I've been doing it since I was a kid, and it's the most relaxing thing and takes you out of your head for a writer, because you have to focus so completely on this particular type of fishing that you can't be worried about your plot or your characters or your book sales. You got to be all tuned in for the fishing. So that's what I do. That's my one and only recreation, really.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're all out of time. Everyone go over to the chat and thank Carl for being here with us. Thank you for joining us, all the students that gave us questions. It was so much fun.
The questions were great. Thank you.
Just a plug for next month, join us for Brian Selznick is going to join us on December 7th. So make sure you get registered for that. Thank you so much, Carl.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I had fun.
It was great.